Ball Pond is a gift from the last glacial maximum approximately 20,000 years ago. The Laurentide ice sheet oozed down from Canada, covering all of New England. As the glacier retreated about 13,000 years ago, Ball Pond formed as a kettle lake within the Housatonic River drainage basin. Ball Pond's watershed is limited to 246 acres of what is now mostly residential land. The pond itself encompasses only 82.5 acres, roughly 1 mile long and 1/2 mile wide. At its deepest point, the depth is 51 feet. It is fed entirely by bottom springs and surface runoff draining east into Ball Pond Brook, an important tributary of Candlewood Lake. In the pre-colonial era, natural water sources such as Ball Pond attracted indigenous people. Lake Halawa is the earliest name known to us, which is thought to mean bubbling waters, a reference to the springs feeding the pond. Legends tell us that an old medicine man named Halawa lived on the hill at the north end of the lake. Many projectile points or arrowheads and other Native American artifacts have been found in this area over the years. The Wiintenock group, members of the Mohican Confederacy of the Algonquin Nation, reportedly lived in eastern Putnam County, New York, and New Fairfield. Their population significantly declined following years of war and disease, and together with survivors from other local tribes, they consolidated into the Schaghticoke tribe, which in 1729 sold the land that became New Fairfield to 12 men from the town of Fairfield. Today, the Ball Pond section of New Fairfield is situated on Connecticut's western border, but this was not always the case. Connecticut's 1662 charter from King Charles II granted Connecticut the right to claim all lands west to the Pacific Ocean. New York State counterclaimed that the Connecticut River was its eastern border. In 1683, the boundary was generally recognized as a line parallel to and 20 miles from the Hudson River north to the Massachusetts border. To gain the Horse's Neck towns in what is now southeastern Connecticut, the state ceded to New York State the town of Rye and a strip of land 580 rods wide, approximately 1.8 miles, from Mamaroneck to Vermont, called the Oblong. Prior to this, Route 22 would have approximated New Fairfield's western boundary. During these years of flux, relatives who settled on adjacent properties in Connecticut could find themselves living on opposite sides of the Connecticut and New York border. Unfortunately, due to a fire in 1867 that consumed New Fairfield's town records, we have limited details about the early settlement of the Ball Pond. But we would like to introduce you to some families that were key to Ball Pond area's early years. Early Ball family arrivals to Connecticut from England claimed shared lineage with Mary Ball Washington, the mother of George Washington. New Fairfield Historical Society records reflect that this is what was told to Ruth Ruffles, who was a local New Fairfield historian. While we make no claims that Washington slept here, his colleague John Adams did pass through New Fairfield and the Oblong in January 1777 en route from Hartford, Connecticut to Fishkill, New York, commenting in a letter to his wife Abigail, "Of all the mountains I ever passed, these were the worst. We found one advantage, however, in the cheapness of traveling." As more genealogical research has been conducted, it's generally accepted that the New Haven Balls are not directly linked to the Virginia Balls, but Ruth Ruffles' notes confirm that a family by the name of Ball lived at or near the pond, and that a Mr. Ball owned a mill nearby. E.H. Pierce, whose family we will introduce shortly, reports that Allen Ball was one of the first 3 settlers of Ball Pond. An early deed file lists an Allen Ball receiving 44 acres upper 10 miles of New Fairfield, which brings the Ball family to town as early settlers. Family genealogy in the New Fairfield Historical Society points us to Alling Ball IV, born in New Haven in 1684, as the most likely Ball family member settling at Ball Pond. He's credited with owning a nearby sawmill. Mills were essential to the life of early settlers. A sawmill was often the first business set up in a new town, even ahead of a grist mill, so it is no wonder that the area became known as Ball's Pond, eventually shortened to Ball Pond. Later, the sawmill was owned by the Mertens family, who emigrated from Germany in 1887 and expanded the business to include a grist mill, cider mill, and distillery. Ball Pond Brook, that drains the pond at its northeast end, was dammed downstream to make a small pond for power, named for the Mertens, which Ruth Ruffles notes tells us was used by area farmers to cool milk. This mill was one of many stationary mills in New Fairfield and was located northeast of the pond on what is now Route 39. The mill was unique in that it had a vertically mounted reciprocating motion up and down saw. It was used to cut mainly oak, chestnut, and cordwood. It took an acre of wood to meet the annual needs of a family for cooking and heat. It should be noted that the mill could not operate in the winter when the pond was frozen. Continuing east, the Sturgis family farmed in New Fairfield for at least 4 generations. 2 of their homesteads are on Route 39 near Warwick Road. Peter, the patriarch, settled in Fairfield in 1680. David, born in 1769, was brought to New Fairfield as a boy by his mother for safety when Fairfield was burned during the Revolutionary War. Benjamin Yale arrived to the area from New York, divorced and in his 40s. He bought 110 acres from George W. Adams. Benjamin had a blacksmith shop on the northeast end of the pond, built right over the water. During the years that he worked there, the mountain behind it was called Ben's Mountain. On the 1867 map of New Fairfield, several Hyatt families lived in the area. One lived on the shores of what we now call Ball Pond Road East. The Hyatt House was an inn and coach stop. A detached building on the property dating back to the 18th century was a stable. Family lore also says that it became a house of ill repute, or later on a speakeasy, if only walls could talk. Gilead and Rossini Hyatt lived at the north end of the pond. Gilead was in the Navy and fought in the War of 1812. The youngest of their 6 children was Henry H. Hyatt, who enlisted in Company K, Heavy Artillery 2nd Regiment, and fought in the Civil War. He was killed at the Battle of Petersburg, Virginia, on June 23, 1864, when he was only 27 years old. The following tribute was found in the Bible of his mother, Roxini Carly Hyatt. I am dying, surely dying. Do not drop the bitter tears. I am bleeding for my country, for the cause I hold so dear. Know I love our starry banner, comrades waved it o'er my head. Let me see that splatters confirm, ere I'm numbered with the dead. Following the Civil War, William Satterlee moved to the north end of Ball Pond. Prior to taking up residence in New Fairfield, young William served as a Connecticut volunteer. Because he was too young to enlist, he was allowed to join as a musician until he became old enough to be a soldier. Upon his discharge from service, he became a farmer and raised his family at Ball Pond. His son, also named William, further developed the farm and established the Ball Pond Hotel, still remembered fondly by longtime residents of Ball Pond and beyond. Continuing west around the north end of the pond is the former home of George W. Adams, who we met earlier when he sold the land that became the blacksmith shop. He was also the original owner of the land that became the Satterlee Farm and Ball Pond Hotel. George was born in 1826 in Pawling, New York, and moved to New Fairfield to marry Clarissa Barnum. He started his career as a farmer, but excelled working with wood and became an expert carpenter as well as a town selectman and assessor. His son, Dr. Alpheus E. Adams, was born in New Fairfield in 1857 and attended local schools, but as a young man chose medicine to be his profession. He pursued a successful career as an eye and ear specialist. At his own expense, he purchased land and erected buildings that became Danbury Hospital, but moved his practice to Newburgh, New York, when a hospital society was started to operate it as a hospital of charity. Grace Art was the summer home maintained by Arthur E. Tweedy at Ball Pond. Arthur, born in 1865, was the third generation of his family in the Danbury hatting business. His grandfather, Abijah E., was a prominent hatting company owner, and his father, Oliver P., dealt in hat trimmings, which at the time was primarily imported. Located on Franklin Road East in Danbury, Tweedy's became the largest U.S. manufacturer of hat bands, aided by a favorable tariff policy. As we round the corner traveling south, we come to the home of two generations of the Pierce family. Related to the Hodges, Barnums, Pennies, and Sherwoods, all early Ball Pond families, they found themselves on both sides of the Revolutionary War, with David Pierce fighting on the side of the new nation and Nathan Barnum Jr. fighting as a Tory. Nathaniel S. Pierce, born and raised in Danbury near the Baptist Church at King Street, purchased Daniel Hodges' homestead on the west side of what was still known as Ball's Pond. Daniel Hodge was an uncle to Nathaniel's wife and the grandson of the second of Ball Pond's original three settlers, Thomas Hodge. Thomas is said to have been born in Brantford in 1689 and moved to New Fairfield about 1710. Nathaniel's son, Alva Sherwood Pierce, set off on one sea voyage at about age 18 to the West Indies. On the return trip, the ship broke apart in a storm on Barnegat Bay, ending his career as a sailor. After Alva's parents died in the 1820s, he started a country store and ran a market wagon to Peekskill-on-Hudson. He also started a comb business, participated in cattle droves to Canada for 20 years, and was the surveyor when the line between Danbury and New Fairfield was run in 1836. He was also a bank director, justice of the peace, and instrumental in the 1851 establishment of the Ball's Pond Post Office, working there until he died in 1875. He was succeeded by his son Amzi Harrison until the post office was discontinued in November of 1893. We are fortunate that the New Fairfield Historical Society has many diaries that were kept by Amzi's wife, Jane Barnum Pierce, and her son, Edward Howe Pierce, which give a glimpse of daily life around the pond from the mid-1800s to the 1920s. Edward was an early amateur photographer, and a collection of stereoscope photos taken throughout the town of New Fairfield are priceless views of people and places during this time. One of his photos, the obelisk, was in a field near the Pierce home. You can see the house and outbuildings beyond. The woman in the photo, taken circa 1920, is thought to be Josephine Taylor Penny, Alva Pierce's granddaughter. Nephew Sam Penny speculated that the obelisk is an ancient Celtic or Phoenician object. To this day, we do not know its origin or purpose. Continuing south, Ball Pond School was one of 7 one-room schoolhouses in town. The school was located on the west shore of Ball Pond, not too far from the current intersection of Ball Pond Road and Fairfield Drive. The district for this school encompassed families from Milltown Road, Titicus Mountain Road, Hudson Drive, Satterley Road, and Ball Pond Road. Next, we come to the Union Cemetery. The 1867 map of New Fairfield depicts both a cemetery and an associated church on the west side of Ball Pond. One of the earliest burials in the cemetery was that of Jabez Sherwood in 1825. Very little is known about the Union Church. New Fairfield Historical Society files say it was built in 1759. The Town Journal reported in 1885 that John Hoyt, George W. Adams, and Frederick S. Olmsted were appointed by the town to sell the remains of the building which had fallen into disrepair. It had been described as a very small building, more like a chapel than a church. This magnificent home, located at the corner of Ball Pond and Milltown Roads, was built as a replica of a French chateau in 1864 by Oliver D. Taylor for his bride, Valeria Pierce. Unfortunately, the house burned in 1945. Valeria was the daughter of Alva Pierce and mother to Josephine Penny, who we saw earlier pictured by the obelisk. The land was originally owned by the Wilson family. Oliver Taylor started out as a farmer, but finding himself not suited to this life, became a railroad fireman and engineer. In later years, he went into partnership with Mr. Adams operating a foundry, then tried the shipping business and ultimately became a Wall Street broker. That line of business seems to have worked out well for him. In recent years, a farm-style house has been erected where the Taylor home stood. The 1900s bring many changes. The 20th century dawned with improved routes and faster means of transportation and communication. Small farms were disappearing, and families looking for supplemental income benefited from taking in summer boarders. This was the era following World War I and prior to the Great Depression. Automobile ownership became more commonplace, enabling city folks to get out to the country. Railroad service was available to both Danbury's Union Station on the Berkshire Line of New York, New Haven, and Hartford Railroad, and to Brewster Station on the Putnam Division of the New York Central Railroad. Vacationers were met and transported to New Fairfield by car. 3 Ball Pond lodges were notable in the 1920s. The Ball Pond Hotel, also known as the Halawa Hotel, was built by Ernest Benedict and owned and operated by William Satterley. It was a destination known for good food and good times, advertising healthful air and a high elevation due to its location in the foothills of the Berkshires. The Signet Inn, operated by Jane Schermerhorn, was previously George W. Adams' home. It is located at the corner of Hudson Drive and Route 39. The Amos Hodge Farm on the east side of the lake was purchased by Philip Seelig and became the Lakeside Farm, also serving as a guest house. All 3 advertised in New York newspapers, inviting city dwellers who enjoy the simple life to come to the country, enjoy fresh air, swimming, fishing, hiking, and boating, as well as good farm-fresh food, ensuring none of the social whirl to be enjoyed at large watering places such as Saratoga, Bar Harbor, and Palm Beach. The pond, one of the coldest in Connecticut, became known for good fishing, which included trout, bass, eel, and carp. It was also pleasant for swimming. Consistent with its origin as a kettle lake, one guest wrote that the sides of the pond are all hard gravel, not the slightest swamp in its neighborhood. An increasing number of summer cabins sprung up on the east side of the pond, surrounded by the remaining farms. A Boy Scout camp was established in 1937 and was operated for several years by the Diocese of New York. The camp was located opposite what is now 59 Ball Pond Road East. Consolidated School opened in 1941, and all the one-room schoolhouses in town, including the Ball Pond Schoolhouse, closed. The Ball Pond Hotel was sold to Mr. and Mrs. Cron's when William Satterley became ill. After World War II, 3 servicemen, Eric and Henry Bessel and Kenneth Ruppel, purchased it and, following extensive renovations, opened it as a dinner and dancing club named Edgemere. It changed hands one more time, purchased by Paul Britch before it ceased operating as a hotel in 1965. Some years later, it became a private home for Roy and Virginia Butler, and was then purchased in the 1980s by the Reformed Church of America, a Protestant religion brought to America by the Dutch. In the 1990s, it reverted to use as a private home. Lakeside Farm was purchased by the Weldon family. For many years, families and groups camped there in the summer, including a group known as the Bavarian Keglers. Tents of all sizes and description were set up. George Weldon stored the tents over the winter for many of the families who returned annually. Usually the man of the family would drive up from New York City for the weekend, while Mom and the kids stayed on for the whole summer. Imagine the friendships that were made. The only telephone available to vacationers was at the Ball Pond Hotel. While Mom waited online for her turn to dial her calls, the kids could buy an ice cream at the snack bar. New Fairfield's population was on a slow decline in the decades following 1900. Beginning in the 1950s, this trend significantly reversed. In 1951, the owners of the former Tweedy summer home, located on the west side of the pond, sold 195 acres to the Lakeside Company. Ads were placed in the New York Daily News as well as the Danbury News-Times, announcing the sale of 50 feet by 100 feet building lots in a development advertised as Tweedy Estates, but later changed to Ball Pond Estates. Maps of the designated lots for sale were created, and a portion of the stone wall along Ball Pond Road near Fairfield Drive was removed to allow entry for parking. Tents were erected in the field with many salesmen available to drive potential buyers around the future development to choose the location to have their new home built. Sales kicked off in June, and by November, roads had been established and house building had begun. Future residential developments included Meadowood Farms from Oliver Taylor's lands and Weldon Woods from Lakeside Farm. With the conversion of farms into suburban housing tracts, there was a need for a local fire department. Since its organization in 1947, the Putnam Lake, New York Fire Department had been crossing the state line to cover the Ball Pond area in support of New Fairfield's Company A, which was founded in 1934. In 1959, town approval was given for the Ball Pond and Squan's Pond Fire Departments to begin operating. A 2-bay firehouse was completed in 1962 for the Ball Pond Fire Department, which housed a 1936 Seagrave and a 1947 Chevy tanker. The 3rd bay and 2nd story training room was added in 1967. As a volunteer organization, the fire department was responsible to raise all funds needed to purchase equipment and cover operating expenses. The annual summer carnival was their biggest fundraiser, and insiders knew where to head for the best hot dogs and beer. Today, the fire department receives a budget allotment from the town, but through the years, they have been resourceful and creative in locating and customizing used vehicles, counting on the skills of many skilled tradesmen among the volunteers who have been generous with their time and talent. In the early years, firemen's wives served as dispatchers, taking calls in their homes and setting off the siren to summon the men to the firehouse. Notification now comes via an app, and a co-ed fire team communicates and coordinates who responds. GPS now guides them to the address. Longtime fireman John Morelli stresses the importance for homeowners to post visible house numbers as required by town ordinance to ensure the quickest response time. The landscape was not the only change. Initially, newcomers were in residence only on weekends and vacations. With the opening of I-684 in the early 1970s, full-time residences increased dramatically. New Fairfield's West Side commuters could easily access the highway to work in Westchester County, Lower Fairfield County, or New York City and still be home for dinner. Ball Pond was described in a vacationer's 1849 diary as having some of the purest and cleanest water which ever washed over smooth and shining pebbles. As families settled into their new Ball Pond Estates homes in the 1950s, The state of Connecticut decided to make Ball Pond a trout-only lake and took steps to eliminate the native pond species. In most years, the state, which maintains a public boat launch at the south end of Ball Pond, continues to stock the lake with both trout and bass for sport fishing. This strategic change, magnified by extra loads of laundry, increased lawn fertilizer, and pesticide application that accompanied the denser population living around Ball Pond, netted a decline in water quality. Native coontail and najas growth accelerated dramatically. A small group of local property owners responded to the problem, forming the Friends of Ball Pond approximately 20 years ago. The nonprofit organization works in conjunction with the town's Ball Pond Advisory Committee, BPAC, first appointed in 1995.
Always cared about the environment. So BPAC, Ball Pond Advisory Committee, advises the town on ball pond policy. So that's a town agency. I joined that because I thought Friends of Ball Pond should have a voice on BPAC. I sort of got drafted by the Friends of Ball Pond, both to join and then assume a leadership role. The last president had done her time, thought maybe I'd be willing to do it, so I did.
Friends of Ball Pond hired a weed harvester for several years among other initiatives to rebalance the plant population. In addition to coontail and najas, Eurasian milfoil became prolific. BPAC member George Buck proposed adding sterile grass carp, known to be voracious eaters, to Ball Pond. Supported by the town and a petition led by Friends of Ball Pond, Connecticut DEEP and the state finally agreed to approve a permit provided that research on the results of adding the carp was conducted. In 1997, Ball Pond became the first public lake in New England to introduce sterile triploid grass carp to control Eurasian milfoil. Tim Simpkins, New Fairfield Director of Health and a limnologist, continues to actively monitor water quality and the population of plants and fish. Overall, the program is rated a success, and subsequently, grass carp have been added to Candlewood Lake.
Friends of Ball Pond started to have an alternative to poisoning Ball Pond to kill the weeds. In 1996, they were instrumental in getting Ball Pond stocked with carp. We were one of the first Connecticut lakes to be able to get grass carp. They were great. They killed the invasive species. Milfoil ate it all up. Coontail returned, which is a native weed, and they managed the coontail very well. The carp have worked. Don't feed the lake monster. Don't put organic material in the lake. Organic material comes from poorly maintained septic systems, chemical fertilizers. Chemical fertilizers are a total waste. 80% runs off into the lake. Friends of Ball Pond did studies at the turn of the century. People's soil is good. They don't need more potassium. They don't need more nitrogen. We don't need chemical fertilizers. Don't dump brush that you cut. Don't dump your leaves in the lake. Don't feed the lake because it feeds algae.
The New Fairfield Land Trust was formed in 1997, about the same time as the Ball Pond Advisory Committee and Friends of Ball Pond. Following a merger with the Danbury Land Trust, it is now known as the Candlewood Valley Regional Land Trust, with 3 properties in the Ball Pond area: the Milltown Preserve, which buffers 2 subdivisions; the Gateway Conservation Area, which was the New Fairfield Land Trust's first property and also serves as a buffer between subdivisions. It includes a wide area of wetlands; and the Halawa Preserve, which includes 3 parcels of waterfront and land adjacent to Ball Pond, totaling over 10 acres, donated by Weldon Woods LLC's developers. Friends of Ball Pond agreed to act as steward for the preserve, and according to longtime former Land Trust President Bill McCann, Halawa was the name suggested by Helen Gallagher and Terry Lent, both former Friends of Ball Pond board members, to honor the Native American name for Ball Pond. Boy Scouts created a lakeside trail and a meditation area within the preserve for visitors to enjoy its tranquility. Today, Ball Pond is a four-season pond, enjoyed for its varied recreational opportunities and scenic beauty. A small beach is maintained for residents living within walking distance. Resident Pete Viola says that in years past, swimming lessons were organized by the New Fairfield Parks and Recreation Department with a lifeguard on duty in the summer. A ban on motorized craft, enacted in 1962, creates an idyllic environment for swimmers, paddlers of all means of watercraft, and a sailboat or two. With cold temperatures and snow pushed aside, ice skaters, cross-country skiers, and hockey players enjoy winter activities on the pond. For several years in the 1980s, the Reformed Church held a polar bear plunge initiated by local author, the late Alfred Kolo. Coney Island's polar bear chief kicked off the events, blowing the traditional conch shell. Today, fishing is enjoyed year-round, including ice fishing for the most patient of anglers. The flora and fauna are breathtaking in all seasons. Birders enjoy sightings of bald eagles, osprey, snowy owl, swans, heron, and the iconic cormorants sunning themselves on their favorite west side dock to dry their wings. Wildflowers line the shore, and the trees change their foliage with each season here on Ball Pond. Was There Beauty? A poem by Alfred Kolo. Long before time, there was beauty, simplicity that started with water, nature's product that feeds it, restoring, reviving, replenishing every cell, to literally change your body for the better. There is no purer beauty than water. Each drop springs from the depths, deep in the heart of nature's bosom, bottomless wells filtered over years through pristine glacial rock, balanced with unique blends of mineral deposits. Nothing can quicker help you feel vibrant, more beautiful, more alive. So when you choose a water to drink or to bathe or wash in, splash or sail on, consider the nature of its origin that defined land's boundaries. Before there was man and before life began, you may well wonder, where was beauty hiding then?